Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very honored to be here. I'm Thais, and today I'm going to talk about the land-based mitigation strategies in the integrated assessment models. And I'm going to try to provide some insights from the IPCC 1.5 database. This talk is mostly based on this paper we published, a mixed effect model approach for assessing land-based mitigation in integrated assessment models from a regional perspective. We published it in 2021 at the Global Change Biology, and it was part of my research at CIRAD with Thierry and some colleagues. Yeah, so I'm going to give a little bit of background, but Vasilis explained a lot about integrated assessment models, so I don't need to go into the details because he provided that before. So a little bit about methods and data, and also the results, which is divided into descriptive and some evidence from the linear mixed approach effect model approach we implemented. So we're starting from the land-based mitigation solutions. We have the adoption of the Paris Agreement by more than 180 countries. And the idea is to pursue efforts to limit global warming well below 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius. And those endeavors, they rely heavily on an ensemble of deep decarbonization pathways, and they are provided by the integrated assessment models. And this has been particularly discussed and developed and communicated in the IPCC report. And according to the IPCC, one of land-based solutions, they are one of the main cost-effective way to achieve the stringent climate stabilization targets. And why that is because land ecosystem can contribute to emissions reduction through different ways, avoid deforestation, some improvements in agricultural management, and also through when it removes, by some approaches that remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Here, we're going to focus on bags and afforestation because despite the number of CDR approaches that has been discussed are implemented in empirical analysis and in the IAMs as well. Most of the future mitigation scenarios, they are predominantly concentrated on bioenergy with carbon capture and storage, the bags, and to a more limited extent, afforestation or reforestation. They both accumulate carbon in growing biomass through photosynthesis, but there are some differences. Different times to achieve maturity, land surface expansions, for example, the maximum CO2 storage. And as previously mentioned, bags has this co-benefit for the energy system, which helps it to decarbonize. So in the integrated assessment models, CDRs, they are largely deployed due to the limited capacity of other sectors to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. This means that the faster and more pronounced decarbonization, the more substantial the deployment of those technologies, those negative emissions technologies. Here in the bottom left of the slide, I have a brief representation of how they are modeled in the IAMs. I think you know a little bit more about that right now at that point. We have some land competition here represented, for example, and this is one of the features of that can be integrated in the models. There are other dynamic factors also represented in them. For example, food demand, different productivity, or constraints on land area, and etc. Most of the models, they achieve the climate goal by imposing a global carbon price And we have bioenergy as a renewable energy source, competing with other technologies, other energy technologies in terms of costs. Particularly for BECCS, according to this paper published by Colbert, the determinants in assigning high value to BECCS in those models could be the model structure, the level of complexity, and assumptions, for example, in terms of technology constraints. And particularly for BECCS, we have some concerns being raised, especially in terms of the potential feasibility. We don't have, this is a technology not yet readily available at large scale. So, and there are some costs of implementation that we are not sure how big they could be. There are some challenges related to land availability and productivity as well. So this is kind of a discussion and description of the features and BECCS in the models. And from that point, our question is, what insights can the IAMs provide regarding deployment potential and their relation with emissions reductions, as well as energy use and consumption levels? And to a lower extent, we want to understand if there is a regional pattern in land-based mitigation deployment, and if so, where the reliance of BECCS or afforestation, they are more prevalent. To do that, we use the IAMC 1.5 database. It's a database hosted by IASA. It has more than 170 scenarios, more than 25 integrated assessment models, and up to, it goes up to 2,100. Since 2019 or 2020, when I was doing my research, they have updated some scenarios, but it hasn't changed that much. So the models there, they quantify the impacts of the different climate mitigation strategies in a context of societal and technological transformation, and basically like the SSPs. We have different scenarios with different constraints, different focus. Some of them, they are more focused on the energy system. Others, they limited the capacity of the deploying BECCS or afforestation. And so they have different narratives being constructed in those scenarios. The drivers of changes, they are consistently defined in terms of the assumptions they use. And in the climate policy arena, they have been extensively used as well. Our approach when doing our analysis was to, from the database, to have a selection criteria, which is basically based on the idea that we would like to maintain just the ones that represent that they are able to achieve a very stringent and ambitious scenarios by targets by the end of the century. And because we had that criteria and the narratives, they are linked to the models, the model selection was basically automatically done when we selected a scenario. Most of those scenarios, they were related to low energy demand, behavior change, and BECCS and afforestation. So they could be framed in terms of the IPCC strategies from the land-based mitigation. They could be divided into land-based options and the others for energy efficiency or energy, some energy aspects and lifestyle changes. To do our analysis, we selected some variables, some outputs, basically the carbon sequestration from biomass, and for afforestation, consumption, final energy and primary energy, and carbon emissions. After we did that, we also developed this linear mixed effect model. And we did our analysis, some tests as well, like, for example, the Dick-Fuller test to see whether the data we were using would be stationary and have some co-integration. But overall, what we understood from this approach was that there was a lot of variability in terms of the models, the scenarios, the regions, and especially for regions, which is our focus. The models, most of the analysis they do at global level. So this is also something that another criteria we use, because not all of them would represent the regions, but in the scenarios linked to the narratives they were constructing. So we have five regions: Asia, Latin America and Caribbean, Middle East and Africa, OECD, and Europe. And also we have the reforming economies of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union. For our second part of the analysis, we have the mixed effect model, and the aim is to understand the influence of BECCS and afforestation on the variables we selected to evaluate. With this model, we want to answer to what extent the heterogeneity that it's involving it's inherent to this model ensemble, they could cause any effect on the model response. And because it's a mixed effect, we have linear and random effects being captured. And the random specifically, it's able to capture the variability across the models. This is the regression we did. We have the response for the BECCS and afforestation as response or dependent variables, as independent variables. And we have the outputs, the variables, consumption, energy, primary energy, and emissions as the dependent variables. For the random part of the model, we have here an intercept for the subjects and the slope, as well as a term for the grouping factor, which is the integrated assessment models. Because we identified non-stationarity, we removed the time trained by differentiating the time series. It's important to mention that our variables, they were transforming to per capita values to kind of kind of limited the differences in terms of size of population and so on. Our linear model, mixed effect model, it allows to account for the dependency between the data, and it has been fit for each of the regions separately using the restricted maximum likelihood method. We also tested for structural instability in the model. I'm not presenting everything here because we have a lot of results. So I just brought some of them to illustrate what we could see from our analysis. At global and regional level, we see here that emissions reductions from BECCS and afforestation, they have different median carbon removal. Basically, by 2050, they are very similar, which means that the major increase occurs late in the century. And we see specifically for BECCS that this increase is sharper. In terms of regions, Asia and OECD and Europe, they have the largest energy crop area and carbon removal potential. But it's interesting to see the case of Latin America, where the potential of emission reduction is very similar between the two land-based options we are analyzing here. And for this, it's interesting to show that Latin America is expected to play an important role in helping decarbonize the energy system. Here in this figure, we have the share of primary energy consumption per region. And if we look into the Latin America information, and we can see that its projection is higher than the others. And here we have percentage changes in primary energy. So it's consider the difference between the baseline. So far, this kind of descriptive information on the database, it shows us that we have different distribution in terms of BECCS and afforestation deployment.
Yes, I'm sorry, but I think you if you could hurry up a little bit because you're running a little late. So
okay, I'm finishing. So yeah, we have different deployment across regions and time and IAMs. To explain that, we have this evidence here from the linear mixed effect model. Basically, we couldn't find any correlation between the final energy and consumption level when changes in BECCS and afforestation deployment happens. But for emissions specifically, we can see a very significant correlation. And for some cases, primary energy as well, especially in Latin America, which is very evident. I'm going to hurry up a little bit. And here we have a figure with the results for the models. We see that there is an agreement in the left part of the figure. We have Asia. There seems to be a closer agreement across the models and a positive relation between primary energy and BECCS, and a negative relation between afforestation and primary energy. For Latin America, the results, they are more discrepant in terms of BECCS and similar consistency in terms of afforestation. And the idea here we can understand is that they agree, the IAMs, they agree in terms of the role of afforestation on primary energy. And some key messages that we could capture when analyzing the data and running our model is that we see that the BECCS, it's preferred not for only its ability to expand energy use, but also because it appears as an alternative for to afforestation. And we saw in the plots and the results that it's associated with a decrease in energy use. There is a lot of variance in terms of BECCS compared to afforestation, but the absolute levels, they are so uncertainty, and also the potential of BECCS to scale up, it's uncertain as well. BECCS is implemented mostly later in the center, and it appears to be more as a compensation to emissions from earlier periods. We were unable to find strong evidence on the regional pattern, because it seems that, for example, for some regions, the models, there's a lot of variability, and the models not necessarily represent that well those economies, especially because they are so aggregated. And there is some agreement across IAMs on the future role, but we don't know exactly to how the high rates of CDR can be actually delivered and where. So to finalize here, we could have a in-depth investigation of the IAM structure. And I think that the previous presentation was very good at doing that as well. So thank you very much.